Welcome to another episode of the Impact Disciple Making Podcast. I'm Mike Keaton, your host, and we're so glad that you have joined us today. I have the privilege to sit here and talk about discipleship with Ken Adams, the lead pastor of Crossroads Church and founder of Impact Ministries. And it is a privilege for me, Ken, because you're probably one of the greatest mentors that I've ever had in my life as it comes to the mission of the church in discipleship. So we've been talking, Ken, about the marks of a disciple over these last few episodes.
Right.
And so we want to talk about that more today and cover another mark. Mm-hmm. And so if it's all right with you, how about we talk about the mark of a minister?
Yeah,
that a disciple is a minister.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so just for a point of reference, though, we've said that a disciple is, first of all, a member, and then also a disciple is a magnifier. So that would mean that they belong, they worship, they mature, meaning that they grow. But then when we say that they are a minister, so that could also mean that they are a servant. So, you know, Mike, you think about this. I mean, it's just really it's almost kind of a no-brainer that if you were to go back to the early church and you were to say, ask somebody randomly, what would describe a disciple? Well, it wouldn't take long at all for somebody to say, you know what, if somebody's called a disciple, what that means is that they serve, they minister to other people. And so they may not have thought about it in the same context we do, but they would certainly have all known that a disciple is a servant. And you know, if you think about it for a minute, even today, that a person can be a servant and not be a disciple, because a disciple is somebody who's being learned or taught. So a person could be a servant, they could be meeting a need somewhere and still not be a disciple. But the opposite of that could never be true. You could never be a disciple being fully trained that looks like Jesus and not be becoming a servant. That would be a contradiction in terms.
Yes.
To be a disciple and not be a servant. It just couldn't happen.
So take that a little bit further. Tell us why.
Well, obviously the greatest servant of all time is who? It's Jesus, right? So listen to what it says in Mark chapter 10, verse 45. He says, "For even the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many." So Scripture's very, very clear that that one of the marks of Jesus's life is that he was a servant. Jesus demonstrated from the beginning of his ministry to the end of his ministry, even his death on the cross is the ultimate demonstration of servant.
Absolutely.
And so from the very beginning of his ministry to the end of his ministry, Jesus' whole life was spent on meeting the needs of other people. He was, in a sense that we never think of it, when we talk about being a minister, a disciple as a minister, man, Jesus was the model of a disciple as a minister. So his life is just really living proof that this idea of being a minister is a mark of a disciple, and so obviously very reproducible mark. It is not just true of him, but true of his disciples, true of their disciples, certainly ought to be true of us today.
Absolutely. And there's proof that it was true of his disciples, because when he told them to go and serve and do as he has done, and how he gave us the example, they obviously did that. Because when you read in the early chapters of Acts, we find the early church ministering to one another in such a way that it says there wasn't a need among them.
Yeah, a perfect example. And think about this. So one of the very last things that they witnessed him do before he went to the cross was to wash their feet. And so Jesus doesn't just say, hey, turn in your books and let's talk about serving. Jesus takes up a basin of water and a towel and he washes their feet, and then he says, what you've seen me do, now you do for one another, you do with each other. And so, you know, Mike, they got a sermon illustration in living color of what it means to be a servant. And so, you know, I would just say this, that if we are serious today about making disciples that are fully trained, that look like Jesus, then here's what that means, is that we're going to have churches full of servants. Mm-hmm. And so we're going to have people all over the planet that are learning what it means, developing the characteristic and the mark of what it means to meet the needs of other people and not just be focused on their own needs. So it is definitely one of the clearest, easiest identifiable marks of what it means to be a disciple that is fully trained, that looks like his teacher.
And if everybody was serving like that, then there would be more ministers in the church than just those who are paid staff members.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, in a typical church, you just have a handful of pastors, but you should have a whole church full of ministers, right? So yeah, that's 100% true. And so, you know, my question would be for somebody who's watching this podcast is that, you know, my question would be, do you have a place of service? You know, does a place of service in a local church where you're using your spiritual gift, is that an identifiable mark of your life? You know, you and I both do, we do a certain number of funeral services for people, you know, every year. And, you know, one of the saddest things that you ever do as a pastor is to talk about somebody at the end of their life and not be able to talk about the ways, and not be able to say that they've served or done anything to help the church fulfill its mission. Mm. It's just really a sad thing.
So every disciple is a minister.
Every disciple needs to be a minister.
And it's an identifiable mark.
Absolutely.
Very good.
Ought to be true about every one of us.
Absolutely. So if someone wanted to try to train some other people in this, how would you direct them?
So once again, you can learn a lot about disciple making and about marks of a disciple by checking out our website, impactdisciples.com. We're trying to make it a resource for everything you need for disciple making. But we want to offer a special resource. It's called Serving Like Jesus Served. And so we want to make this resource available for free to everybody who is watching this podcast or listening to this podcast. We want to provide for them a free resource that really helps you to understand what it means to serve like Jesus served. So really all you have to do is contact us through impactdisciples.com and we'll get one right out to you. So it'd be a tool that you can use to develop those kinds of disciples. Fantastic. I think it's a great tool, and certainly the person going through it would grow, but as they help others and serve others, then other people would grow as well. Yeah, absolutely. That's great. Thank you, Ken. So we thank you for joining in with us again this time on Impact Disciple Making podcast, and hopefully this has been helpful for you as you serve in your context, helping make those disciples and build the kingdom of God. Thanks for tuning in. Don't forget to visit impactdisciples.com, and we'll see you next time.